it's 5 minutes. I have to use a microphone this evening because we're being videoed by Peter. And we now have a quorum of 10. There are more people on the phone, I think, but we still need to have a quorum in the room. There are a couple of other strange things about having people on the phone. One of them is that whenever we reach agreement in any way, consensus or however, we do have to go around the room and say that we're on board or we're not on board. So we just have to go around one by one and do that for the record. Is this working?
Yes.
Good. First thing is the roll call. So I'll put this down and you can just go around the room and I'll check you off.
Sarah Manser.
Sarah Manser. I'm having to do it because if you think I can play it down that fast, you're Michael.
He's trying to call in. He just called me and sent him a number to do it.
It's not done. Okay. So thank you. So the first thing we do this afternoon, at the beginning of this mega meeting, I mean, we are in for like 4.5 hours of meeting. We haven't actually scheduled any breaks, so we'll be taking breaks as we need them. If you decide that you really do need to stop and collectively take a break, then you can say so, and we'll do that. The first item on the agenda is public comment, so let's go there right away. This is public comment opportunities for those of you who are not members of the committee to make comments about items that are on the agenda. Any takers? Yes. So we need to get you a microphone. So perhaps you would come here and use this one right here.
Just take it out.
Oh, I'll stand next to you, Mike. That way you'll be on it again, too. I'm John Aird. The one issue, and I think it's pertinent to your hearing, I'm not totally sure, so if I'm off base, I hope you'll accept that, was I was a bit disturbed to see that, or somewhere I was informed that some of the earlier work that had been done, the sort of worksheets and formula and analyses that were done, which I expected would be brought to this committee at some point, that some of the basic information was no longer available. Now again, I'm not sure that that's accurate, but it seems to me if the city paid for studies, that the city and this committee should have all that information brought before it at the appropriate time. So I think if you need to demand it, you should, because that's a good baseline. I don't know that you'll agree with it or will agree with it, but it certainly is. You don't want to have to redo any part of that analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Actually, when did you want to say something?
Doug has just told me that he is here for the roll call in case he didn't get him already.
Oh, great. I didn't get him already. Doug, welcome out in cyberspace. Is there anybody else joining us electronically, Karen? Do you know?
Not a committee member, unless a miracle happens, in which case we'll let you know.
Yeah. Okay. So we've also got Doug input on the Skype. Any other public comment? Then let's move on. Let's just have a look at the agenda. We're starting out here. We'll approve the summary or make any changes that we have to it. We want to hear from committee members about any updates of communications they've had. Then we're going to have Sarah Manser is giving us information about the website, the status of it, and also because a major item of the website is a timeline, so she can walk us through the timeline to give us a sense of the history. We need to visit the results of the survey that you completed about presenters, and at the same time we're going to talk about subcontractors, because there's some stuff that sort of goes together there. Supply and demand, this is a big item. There's a lot of time allotted to this. We're going to hear from Rosemary about that. Elements of a decision, this and MCDS, these two kind of go together.
Switch mics.
Oh, switch microphones? Okay. Very good.
No, this is Keith Sterling, who's the city's community relations manager, and he's in his, I don't know, 4th or 5th week on the job.
Already causing trouble.
Already causing trouble. That's great. Thank you, Keith. Where were we? Yes, these two items, again, these are big items, big elements of the evening's entertainment. We'll be working on them. The independent review panel, we need to visit that again. You've had a paper that was passed out about that. Then we'll wrap up and we'll conclude. We're scheduled to end at 9:30, 9:30, so it's quite a long haul. Does anybody have any questions about this or suggestions about ways you might reorganize it? Good. Oh, David.
I'm just curious if we might be better off discussing presenters and subs either later in the meeting or tomorrow after we've gotten more information, or whether we have sufficient information base in order to discuss that.
The question was,
Oh, yeah. We're going to have to get into the habit of doing this. The question was, should we postpone the presenters and subs discussion until later today or even tomorrow, so that there'll be more to talk, so that the committee will have a better understanding of the issues at play. We could do, it's a 20-minute item. If we move it, we'll have to sort of shove something. I don't know if there's something on the second day that we could put in this evening. Was there anything that you saw on the second day that you'd like to have this evening instead?
I hadn't really thought of it in those terms. It just seemed to me that we haven't talked about water yet at our meetings, and it would seem like before we decide about things like presenters and subs, maybe we would spend a little time doing that.
Well, there's one sort of relatively movable item, and that, Mike, is your report about the report to the council and correspondence with the community. Is that something you could kind of produce in a few minutes? Yes. Then let's try doing that. It's not. I mean, Mike's report is only 10 minutes, but it will put us only 10 minutes out of whack. So let's do that. Now I don't have a pen. So we're going to put. This will be till tomorrow, Friday, and instead we're going to do report and correspondence. Great. I should have checked actually to see if anybody objects to that. I should have checked to see if anybody objects to that before I made the change, but I didn't hear anybody really bleating, so I think we're okay.
And the other part of that is to put it later in the agenda tomorrow, after we've done the supply-demand scenarios. Just shifting the order of things for tomorrow.
Okay. Well, let's look at the agenda tomorrow when we do it and see where it fits, because it's not as if this is actually not. It doesn't seem to me to be a very big, significant item, but we probably should. We'll look at it tomorrow, and when we do the setup for tomorrow, and you can comment when we're reviewing the agenda. Okay. Okay. So now we go on to the summary and the action items agenda, and we got from Doug some comments which I will tell you so that he doesn't have to struggle with technology. That's your copy. Maybe I'll just sort of start with that. Or do we want to try the audio and see if it works? No. Okay, here we go. Doug noticed that the summary for the meeting in May, there was an item relating to the Cemex quarry, and it should read, more or less, the owner of the former Cemex quarry near Little Creek is willing to lease the property to the city for water storage. It said something different from that. That's what he suggests it should say. Any objections to changing it to say that? Great. Does anybody else have anything they want to change on the summary? Or on the action item agenda?
But I know we're using motions. I don't know if we're using motions. It's not on.
Oh, we should maybe just hide that.
Talk loud. I'm not sure if we're taking motions, but I would move we approve this draft with the change that you suggested.
Oh, great. We don't have to take motions. If there's nobody objecting, we can say this is this is done. But you know what? Because we're on Skype, we have to go around the room and make sure that everybody's on it. So just say your name as loudly as you can.
Sarah Manser.
If you're approving the summary as amended.
Peter Beckman. Sid Slater.
Mike Rotkin.
Rick Longinati. Dana Jacobson.
Charlie Keepman. David Baskin.
I just want to clarify, you said it was for sale to the city? They offered it to the city?
Release.
And is that true? That's the correct, it was to the city, it wasn't to the land trust?
It came from you guys.
It actually came from Doug.
It came from Doug, so Doug's correcting it.
Okay, great, I just want to make sure it was correct, so, yeah, okay, fair enough.
Oh, Erica, right?
Yes.
Mark Messina Miller.
I don't get the
You
vote.
don't get to vote. That's okay. This is going to be like a sort of a maypole. So, thank you. Okay, we have a form here on the wall. Things we agree on, we write up. So we've approved the summary, Carrie has written it down. Yeah. So if Carrie writes the wrong thing down, or forgets to write it down, or if I forget to write it down, holler, because if it doesn't go down there, it may not go where we need it. So, committee member updates. So this is when members provide news of significant communication between them and organizations with significant interest in the development of water policy in Santa Cruz.
May I suggest you walk around that way and use your microphone so that we can hear it? Because some of the microphones don't work, so just walk around.
Which microphone? This microphone?
Yes, use yours. Yours is the best.
Well, why do I need to stand over here?
What?
Why do I need to be over here? I don't get it.
Because you're going to start with Sarah so that you don't get tangled around the table. Unless you don't want to.
Okay, I'm going to wait for them to tell me. The one that will raise their hand and say, yeah, I want to say something. You know,
Okay.
like Rick. Here we go.
There's a water policy event that I'm helping to organize, and that's happening on July 18th. We're inviting Ron Duncan, who's the conservation manager of the Soquel Creek Water District, and Connor Everts, who's a longtime water policy activist from Southern California. And the title is Conservation Lessons, so learning from our neighbors and learning from Australia. Connor Everts visited Australia and to find out what kind of conservation measures are going on there. So I have a flyer to pass this around and invite you to spread the word. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, we is the Santa Cruz Desal Alternatives group.
Other items? Okay. We are on to the next item. We're on to the next item, and that is, this is Sarah Manso. So we're going to have from Sarah a presentation about the website. What we want to get out of this section of the meeting is an understanding of the plans for the website and really the website status, what's happening, and an agreement on any further directions from you to the website subcommittee. And we also want to have a preliminary understanding of the history of the city's water supply, because she's going to be able to go through the timeline. So, Sarah, would you like this?
Probably. Let's get rearranged. Okay. So as part of this, I just wanted to give you, we got the first run of the website online yesterday. So it isn't fully populated yet. So, but this will kind of give you an idea of colors, and it looks horrible on this projection, but just kind of an idea. And on the regular page, this is actually just a banner across the top, and this is your major navigation throughout the website. So this is your main page, which will have basically pictures, documents that could slide across the top along this slider here. And then there's your bios. So they're going to switch over routinely, like when you upload the page every different time, it'll have different members in the in there. So it's kind of like meet a member section. And then along with that, kind of breakdowns of our most recent meetings. And this is all the main page, right? When you pull up the website, this is what's there. And then other areas. So when we actually start populating the frequently asked questions, those will come up on the main page, and kind of ones that occur often and are recent replies will go here. And then also people will be able to sign up to get notified when the packets are ready, et cetera, and the updates for our meetings, and they can do that through the main page. Yep. So this is what it's gonna look like. Some of the other stuff's not quite fully done yet, but let's see here. And then this is kind of a breakdown overview of what the committee is. Then along with this will be all the committee bios, et cetera, how this came about. Under the Learn About Water section, which is not populated at the moment, is going to be this timeline. So this is the curated history timeline setup that Clark created for us. And so I was going to take you in a little bit of a run through it. And this is what I'd really like feedback on, is if we want to add or delete things that are on this timeline that you think are appropriate. So along the top is going to be the pictures and the actual, you can navigate forward and backwards. And then underneath is a timeline in years. So you can normally visualize these together. Okay. So underneath the pictures too are links to the pertinent document or links to the page. So those are also kind of comments I'd like to take back too. So let's start. Back in 1948 was the first establishment of the Santa Cruz Water Commission. Notice the fabulous computers, they were way ahead of their time. We're gonna find a 1948 picture, but completion of Loch Lomond. Back in the day, huh? The first chancellor at UCSC, sitting on the hallowed ground. The establishment of UCSC Water Services. Description of the expansion of the water system, including the completion of the Graham Hill treatment plant, which is beforehand, I guess it was water being directly, it doesn't really matter, but I think it was actually being directly fed to customers. The development of the Felton Diversion Station, 1976. And then, bear with me, but you get to watch 2 minutes of a 1970s video. Now tell me if this sounds familiar. guys hear it? Okay. It's just music at the moment. You can't really hear it. It's
particularly in Northern California, have been so rare as to be beyond the memory of most consumers. Wasteful water use
Can anyone hear
in the
it?
state was a way of life for many people.
It's like really
The prevailing
quiet.
attitude
Sorry about
was
that.
that there had always been, and probably always would be, a plentiful water supply.
There's something in the background.
Yeah, okay.
In the fall of 19...
Anyways, you can look at it when you actually get to the timeline. It's 30 minutes long, but it's classic. It just starts out saying, you know, basically exactly what we're saying right now. Santa Cruz, you know, California was in the middle of the drought, and it's just kind of funny to kind of see everything recycled. So, yeah, so you can look at the video. It's just kind of entertaining. And you get to see all the high-tech equipment that they had at the time. Okay. So then, the development of the Santa Cruz Water Master Plan in 1985, along with the construction of the Belts Wells. We'll add another picture in here. The reestablishment of the Water Commission. So we'll have another link to the Water Commission website as well. The Water Master Plan. And then some of the studies that we'll probably be looking at information from today. And so this will actually link you directly to the documents so that you can actually go and people can access them and read them. And kind of get the historical perspective of where we are now. Then the original Water Conservation Plan, same thing. You're able to access these documents from the timeline itself. Water supply study, the water curtailment study, the regional water supply alternatives. So here you can see this will link you.
Sarah, can I ask a question?
Certainly, please.
We need to amplify you.
I'll just talk a little bit out.
You can repeat the question.
Are these going to all, these choices that you're going through, all going to appear on a single page or a pull-down menu, or people have to literally go through each one before they find that number 9 is the curtailment study?
There are other ways to search for that kind of information. This is basically just an interface for somebody who's kind of going in blind. So you can go and search for the documents in other locations. You don't have to only link through it through this particular timeline. What it's doing is just kind of presenting all of that, the documentation, within context of where it fell in history.
As a timeline.
Right, exactly. So this timeline links to the documents. The documents are also accessible from other locations
And those other locations.
and searchable.
There'll be a list of documents by topic.
To tell you the truth, we decided not to do that, but you can,
Excuse me.
oh, sorry.
Answer so that everybody knows what the question is, or repeat the question. It's tough.
So the first question was, is this the only way you could access the documents? And no, it's just a timeline to give you context. And then secondarily, the question was,
Whether there will be somewhere that people who don't,
right,
who are just starting, say like, well, what studies have they already done? Rather than having to go through 12 or 15 or 15 study, will they see, have a pull-down menu or somewhere across the top or a list, all on one page?
right. So instead of a setup like that where you're going to have 500 documents, so instead of having, you know, the question is whether you're going to have a page that has all the documents listed on it. And instead of doing that, because those are really hard to navigate, we're going to have an enhanced search feature.
If you're going to get to this example where I can just wait.
I will get to that, because the search feature is not coming up on the website, so I have to pull up the other document. We're going to have a search feature, basically. And, but then under the Learn About Water, In fact, that's a perfect segue. Unless, do you guys want to see the rest of the timeline and see what else is on it? Yeah, David?
I don't know about seeing, is this mic working? Yeah, it sounds like it. I just want to make sure you get back to where you ask us for our suggestions about things to add to the timeline.
Right. So let me just finish up with it, and then we'll take suggestions back. How about that? And then we'll wrap back around to Mike's questions, because that'll help in the navigation of the website. Okay. So I guess not all the links are working. Okay, so you can also navigate instead of going through. I'm sorry, that is my phone. Everybody, the meeting's in session now.
I was going to try and click you through this.
Okay. So instead of having to click through everything up here, you can also go down and find through the dates, right? So you can move and navigate through this. Okay. All right, so the water supply alternative study. Water conservation plan, which was the 2000 to 2010 one. Alternative water supply, water curtailment, and then the evaluation of the regional supply alternatives from 2002, which was, I think, started in 1999. Integrated water plan, the adequacy of municipal water supplies, environmental impact report, which was for the original program of the IWP, the CWD squared, and this is a video explaining that, and I think Hillary Bryant and Tom LeHue were talking there about the necessity and need for it. Water shortages. So this is basically all the documents are, the main documents are presented on the timeline. Then Measure P, 2012. And then coming into kind of the last couple years, talking about the drought and the water restrictions and implementation of those, and dry years. So we might not, David and I were discussing, and we might take out a couple of these later ones, but we like the links to the documents throughout the timeline, so. Water Supply Advisory Committee. Water restrictions. So again, this might be a little bit repetitive, but for these last couple. And instead of adding each individual meeting on the timeline itself, we have a separate page for the meeting so people can access the information through that. So there's a lot in here, but just as an interface, it seems more friendly than having a list of documentation. And so that's why we stuck with this, and then I'll get a little bit more into how the rest of the page is going to look too when we get to that. But comments and suggestions I am definitely willing to take right now.
When does this? We need to either repeat what he suggested. Okay. Does that microphone work?
Well, now it's back working.
When do you think this will go live to the public? Any time frame?
If we can populate it in the next 3 weeks, by mid-July, so
Is
before our next meeting.
Is it possible to email this link out to
Yes,
the members?
and I'm going to do that.
Review kind of, because for me to figure out a website, I like to kind of surf through it.
And it's pretty basic framework. We were hoping that it'd be a little bit more advanced right at the moment, but we can provide the link, and then when updates come to it, we can send that information to you, okay? So the question was, You heard it? Okay.
Yeah, I just had a suggestion about, there was a video in there with Tom LaHue and Hillary Bryant. As I recall, that was more of an editorial kind of commentary than a documentary sort of piece. You know, it seems like you're doing documents and then this thing doesn't fit to my way of thinking. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay. Yeah, David?
So, I saw. Okay, so I saw that where you start with in 1948 with the creation of the Water Commission. It would be nice if there was a listing of all the water supply sources that the city had at that time, and maybe even a pie chart that shows what percentage of water it got from what sources. And then as you go along, and we either add sources or lose sources, or our percentage changes, to have an occasional pie chart to see how our water supply is changing over time. So that as all this work is done, we actually can learn about the water supply. I noticed that there was a listing in there of the decision of the acquisition of the Zianti property rights when there was discussion of the Zianti Reservoir, and I think that there should be something on the timeline about when the decision was made not to pursue the Zianti Reservoir. And then, because it's so supply-oriented, to put in something in the timeline that tells when the state and federal fishery authorities start telling us that we have to do a habitat conservation plan, and that is going to have an unknown as yet impact on our water supply, but will decrease it somewhat. So those, you know, to me, having links to all the documents is great, but I'd like to have the timeline let us see how our water supply has developed and what the current state of it is in terms of sources.
What was the last one you mentioned?
The Habitat Conservation Plan, the HCP.
Other? Oh, no.
Question?
Uh-huh.
In your history, is every document that was made available to the WSAC listed?
It isn't every single document, it's the major ones. The other documentation can be found, it'll be under a little blurb underneath this, basically. Instead of a huge list, it'll have, this is the link to where you can get all the documentation.
Okay, and how did you decide which documents you were going to list in the timeline and which ones you were going to leave out and let people find elsewhere?
Clark created this initially, so do you have a comment on that?
Kind of just where I found the documents the most common. There were some some websites where you could actually find all these documents in one spot. I can go back through these and email those to you guys if you want also.
Well, we were given a CD or two, I think, at the beginning that had just a ton of documents on them. If this is the WSAC website, it'd be nice to have all of those documents listed, and the time history would be a good feature to know when they were done.
Yeah, so the ones that are included are kind of, we did a mini review of them, and they are the major documentation that goes along with the decision-making process. There's a lot of other studies that went into that are on the CD that we got and are also in the draft EIR amendments. And they'll be linked through a different location. So, I mean, when we review this, and if you take a look at it going forward, or if there are specific ones that you want included and added to this, that would be great. It's just, that's a lot of documents, because right now it's kind of getting a little long for the timeline. So either that, or we could, instead of listing each document individually, we could click on it and say, you know, from 1999 to 2000, these were the documents there, and go to the website that lists that information. That's another opportunity, is kind of modifying this interface here. And instead of having the one single document in each click, you'd have a set of documents under a page that you click through. Does that make sense? So if that's preferable, that would be an option.
I'm not sure that there's a strong preference amongst the committee. I'm just concerned that people go to the website. People go to the website and they find the easy stuff, but they haven't found the important stuff. And so I'm just wondering why some things were decided to be more important than other things.
It was basically major studies rather than the smaller details that went into each of the studies.
Okay, thank you.
And, okay, yeah.
Would it be useful for you and David, the committee, to hear back from committee members if they say, you know, this document really ought to be included?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what we're asking for.
Yeah.
As you review this, to give us feedback on, well, that one's not necessary, or I'd really like this piece of information added to that.
And the committee members are going to have a way of accessing the timeline between now and the next. Can they just send stuff to the committee?
Yeah, you just send it to David and I. I'm going to send out the link. Our hope was that the timeline would already be embedded in the website because it's a lot easier to access than what it is currently that we've been having to deal with. So we were hopeful that that would be ready to go. But if it isn't done this next week, then I'm just going to send it to you guys and have you review it. Okay. So for that overview, now this is the wireframe of what it's going to look like. And we've decided to go in ancient Latin because it's a great communication tool with the public. So if you disagree with that, I'm sorry, the decision's already made. So anyways, so this is kind of the framework, right? This is the bare bones minimum of what the website's going to look like. So this is what's going to be feeding into what is actually there now. We showed you the main page, right? This is going to be that slider bar now. So under the about the WSAC, we're going to have the committee members, and then also links to the dialogue maps. And this is actually going to house the dialogue maps in the future, I believe, right? So when we develop those and work on those, you as committee members can now go to this website and access that information. So the goal of the website is not only to communicate with the public, but also to kind of create a forum for us to get our information a little bit more efficiently than getting 60 emails at once. Okay. Meeting information's pretty, basic. We'll have the audio, we'll have the agenda and the minutes and any presentations that might have been in there. And then learn about water is the timeline, will be the main. The timeline will be here. And then underneath that are going to be boxes. These sidebar boxes are now at the bottom with kind of pockets of information. So this is one of those places where location could be like, if you are interested in this, this is the link to that kind of information. Instead of having just an entire list of every single document and every single resource that people can go to, it breaks it up so that people can access it a little bit more intuitively. Okay. So the water history timeline. And then below that will be kind of a clearinghouse of some of the frequently asked questions as we develop those going forward. With links to how you can get involved. So I think we talked about this last time. This is going to be the interface for the public to send public comments and also to send, ask questions. And they could be as simple as, where's this document? Can you please send it to me, or where is it on the website? And Mike is developing like a general review of responses to start with, and then we'll get into the discussion of how we want him to kind of curate this information. So this interface will be where the public sends us information. It'll go through Mike, and then it'll be distributed to us, or he will respond appropriately, and or both. Okay? So there'll be a message, and then there'll also be a drop-down menu for subjects. For people to kind of self-select if they wanted a public comment, if they wanted, we can kind of develop what the drop-down menu subjects are going to be, if we'd like to. And then finally, there's going to be a full page, a search page, separate from just a little box. And what that's going to do is as people start searching, it's going to generate, are you guys familiar with a word cloud? So what it is it's a bunch of words all together. And as people put those words in more often, the word grows larger or smaller. So say it's, water, it's desal, it's, San Lorenzo, it's Felton. Water will probably be the largest word in this word cloud. And then, so that people, instead of just putting in a search area, it kind of makes suggestions for what they can search for. And it'll tell, the public what is the most often searched term. It's just another way to interface for people. And then what will come down here is results within the website itself, not the entire internet. So we wanted to keep it focused. We can add a link to Google if we want to, but really it's to be information that's housed within the website itself. So, Mike, in answer to your question earlier, the kind of subtopics with documentation links would be in this page under Learn About Water. And then within the website is going to be a library that's behind the scenes, basically. So if they search for documents or they search for something under a topic, then those documents will come up even though you're not linking to them directly through a website. Does that make sense? So not everything that's accessible on the website will be listed on all the main pages. And that just has to do with, there's a lot of information. And once you start listing, the interface just falls apart. So, but if you have documents, what I'll do is I'll send you the list of the documents we have in the library so far and the links that are there. If you want to add or subtract from that list, provide feedback on that, okay? So other questions?
As you're thinking of other questions, also think about instructions for the subcommittee that you think they need to get from you in order to complete the work the way that you think it should be completed.
Exactly. We're here to serve you.
It looks like there are no questions. It looks like we've done it.
Except for one thing.
What's that? Oh yeah, the floor.
Sure. Yeah, so once you get it and can play around with it, has a little bit more populated in it, it'll make more sense. And you can tell us, you can try and break it for us too. Okay? Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Do we need any of this anymore?
So,
I don't think so.
next up is Mike. Do you want to know from that? Right. So, this is originally on the agenda for yesterday at the beginning of the afternoon. Oh, I'm sorry. It's been a hard day. Tomorrow, but here we are. The time machine worked, and here he is.
Right. Well, you folks selected me to represent you to the city council in terms of represent us to the city council in terms of what we've done. And there was an excellent written report that basically summarized our issues. The main points that I added verbally were emphasizing the strong commitment of this group to consensus, how hard we worked on that, my observation that the group, if any group could come to a consensus, it looked like it might be this group in terms of intent. I didn't know that we would, but that we certainly, that was our goal, and that got a really clear sense that people were prepared to work together and be open-minded about how this was going to proceed. I explained why we had changed in some ways their proposal to us about hiring Stratus and how we had modified that, and why we had a technical advisory committee that we wanted to have appointed. I got the right name there, but the group that we're going to have work with us, the 3 to 5 people, experts to help us understand the material that we're getting. And I gave a very brief, uncharacteristically brief presentation for me, and they were pleased with that, I think. And I made clear that we were looking for a small amount of additional money to be able to hire the technical committee that we wanted to have. They supported the staff recommendation, which included all these things unanimously. Rosemary and I were the only 2 people in the audience for this entire event. The vice mayor pointed out that we must be doing something right because they didn't get people yelling at each other and booing and hissing at the meeting for the first time in 2 years when the word water came up. So I think either they're not paying attention or they like what we're doing. That would be my conclusion. Don assumed that they like what we're doing. And that's basically it. Don wanted to communicate that they really appreciated the work we were putting into this, and they understood how much work was involved in it. And the rest of the council, I would say, was affirmative of that comment that he had made. And other than that, there was no controversy. There was not a lot of debate, discussion. There was a quick motion second, and it passed unanimously. That's my report. Are there questions?
Any questions?
And it didn't take 10 minutes. We're done. Thank you.
No, it did not take 10 minutes. You know, I have something that I'd like to just raise and see if anybody has any objection to it. Yeah.
It's right next to you.
Good. This is a quickie. Some of you, or at least one of you, has said we should be meeting in Live Oak. And we've had some correspondence from residents of Live Oak saying, you know, you should be meeting over here. Are there any objections to conducting meetings, maybe only one meeting, but certainly in Live Oak sometime in the future?
You know, I may be wrong, but I thought there was a consensus that we would have one meeting in Live Oak.
It was brought up, but we never recorded it properly, and so...
No, the discussion that we had, I'll just recall it quickly, was that people were concerned that if we met at a bunch of different places, we would actually lose participation from people because they wouldn't know where we're meeting, and whereas having a regular place would be very helpful. On the other hand, there was a symbolic importance to at least meeting it once in the other people who were served by the city's water system. And so I think there was, I may be wrong, but my sense was there was a consensus that we should have at least one meeting. That would be our plan in the Live Oak area. And I thought that's what we had sort of come to consensus about.
Thank you very much.
I've heard it's nice in Live Oak in August. Very lovely time to be there.
It's actually extremely difficult for us to find space on sort of back-to-back days. We're going to be lucky if we can kind of squeeze ourselves in for maybe one day out of two sometime in the fall, and maybe next year we'll be able to get a couple of days next to each other. It's really tough getting good places for you guys. It is not easy. So thank you very much. In any case, so now we've got that, at least one meeting in Live Oak. Next is you and Rosemary.
It's me, only because when it comes to questions and answers, I may do a little bit of facilitating. But this is really the heart of today's meeting, is the presentation about supply and demand. You all have copies of it, and Rosemary's going to be also showing it on the screen, which then allows the people who are attending remotely to see it.
That reminds me, we haven't paid any attention to people.
I've been paying attention to them.
So if they have any questions, they will ping you.
Their question is, why can't you guys use the mic? Because unless you use the mic, the people who are in Italy and Denver can't hear you. Okay? That's their only question.
I noticed Greg Pecking's name coming up on the
He's
screen.
on there too.
He's on there.
But he can't talk because he didn't do all the agenda stuff. So he's simply attending.
Okay.
All right. So we're happy to have them. Thank you all, Italians and Denverites. Rosemary's giving this very hefty presentation. There are some slides that are more for your later enjoyment. So she'll whip through some of them. And you know, Rosemary, we're going to not just have a Excedrin headache number, whatever. I think she'll find a way to make it interesting. And I also hope that you'll find ways to make it interesting. Ask questions along the way. It's the only way that you as a group will be able to absorb this quantity of information. All right, ready, set, kind of go. Let's make sure I have the screen going.
Okay, so I'm going to sit here because I think it will be a little bit easier to do it that way. Everyone has a copy of this presentation. There are copies in the back. If there aren't extra copies, if we've run out of copies, it's on the website, and if you happen to have your computer, we can give you the link to go and find it. So, Carrie, are you going to give me the mouse when you find the presentation? Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll do
All right,
that.
but I can vamp until I'm ready.
Yeah, so tap that a little bit.
Okay, so I actually want to start off by talking a little bit about what this presentation is and what it is not. So what it is the most available relevant information about supply and demand. What it is not, especially as it relates to future supply and demand, is a definitive statement of this is where we are and these are the assumptions and these are the things, all this is the way it must be. I think that when you do the kind of work that we've been doing in the water department over the last few weeks as we've prepared this, you recognize that there are a lot of assumptions that go into particularly future demand forecasting and really discussions about supply. So what I've tried to do in pulling this presentation together is to really give you a sense of the nature of the information. There are slides in here which I've purposely put in as backup information as opposed to stuff we need to go through, but I've kind of designed this to be the primer and the reference document. So we're going to go through it. I imagine we're going to have lots of conversation about it as we go through it. I do agree that questions as you go through are welcome. And then we are going to be talking about this undoubtedly over and over and over again through Recon. Some very specific decisions have been made about what to include at this stage, recognizing that for Recon, the data is good enough to help you understand the basic big moving pieces, and that as we get into the real deal, you're going to want to know more about specific kinds of things. And you can see that there are charts over on the windowsill over there too, talking about possible additional research questions and tasks for Stratus and et cetera, et cetera. So as we're going through this, if you do have things that you would like to say, we need to know more about that, let's go ahead and get them listed, because we'll be wanting to talk more about all of that as we go forward. All right, so I want to start by up here, sorry. It's not a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm having a hard time trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing here. I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview of why we're doing this and sort of setting the stage, and then I want to kind of give you a representational view of how sources are deployed to meet demand. And that's really designed to just sort of help you think about what's the main task we're trying to accomplish when we operate the system. And so you'll see that. And then we're going to transition from there to a little conversation about curtailment, the role of curtailment, current supply, current demand, future supply, future demand, and conclusions and takeaways. So that's the big picture outline of this presentation, and you can certainly follow along, make your notes as you like. The fundamental question that we're really here to talk about is what are we going to do about the reliability of the Santa Cruz water supply? And the assumption there is that we need to make a definition we need to become educated about how reliable the supply is, and that's probably not a place that everyone says, oh, the number is 1, and we all agree it's 1. There are going to be conversations around that issue. But realistically, from a water supply planning point of view, the fundamental measure of reliability is the degree to which available supply can meet existing and future demand under a range of foreseeable and unforeseeable but probable circumstances or conditions. And as you already know, those of you who've been involved in this historically know that there are a variety of ways you can stack up programs and drought tolerances and water supply availability to get yourself to a place where you feel like you have a reliable supply with this mix of resources and strategies. So it doesn't imply that there is an answer. It just basically says, this is what we have to grapple with. This is the basic task. So to sort of walk you through kind of from a water supply perspective, this is, I think, a really good example of something that helps you to get a sense of what we do. So this is our normal demand curve. This is monthly demand. It shows the what we see, which is we have low winter demand, and then as the season dries out and we start using water for irrigation, we get a peak season demand, and then it comes back. And that's pretty typical. Every water utility I've worked in 4 states now has a curve that looks a lot like this. And when we operate to meet this demand, we start, whoops, I have to go up here. We
Okay,
start to.
So my first question,
Go ahead.
over what period do you draw this average?
You know what, this is a representational view. It's not intended to be a specific set of years. So let's not get, we're not going to get all sort of into the, you'll see a lot of information later that's specific content to specific years, but this is representational. Notice the sort of crayon-esque.
No, that's fine, I appreciate it, thank you.
Font. So the best source we have, and especially all those of you who've been on tours with us, and thank you so much for taking your time to do that, know that deploying the North Coast supplies are the best quality water we have, and so we love to use those first. Then we add the San Lorenzo sources on. Next, we will add the Belts Wells on to bring some groundwater into the system, typically in the peak season. And then we will use Loch Lomond supply. So that's the typical strategy that we use to, make available water to meet this demand curve. And it obviously changes a little bit every day based on the total supply or the total demand of the system, and we'll have a graph that shows the variability of that in a minute. In a drought, unless you do something to change the demand curve, it's the same demand curve in a year when you have a lot of water as when you don't. And the actions like we're taking this year, curtailment, actually move that demand curve down. But without anything else happening, it's the same demand curve. So again, you get the same strategy, but you'll notice by going back a few slides to look at what happened under the non-drought condition, that the amount of water from the North Coast is substantially less under drought conditions. The amount of water coming in from the San Lorenzo is less under drought conditions. Belts wells, because they're groundwater, are not really they're not subject, or at least not immediately subject to the influence of drought conditions. Over the long haul, if you have long-term drought, your groundwater resources will be impacted, but typically a little bit more resilient than the surface water supplies in drought conditions, and don't show the effect right away. And then, you bring in the Loch Lomond, and here you can see in this again, representational view, starting augmentation with Loch Lomond water is, starting in April, late March kind of time frame, was yesterday. Was that right, Toby and Heidi, that Terry Tompkins told us we started Loch Lomond? We actually turned Loch Lomond on for the first time since March, when we were having it on for seasonal water quality issues yesterday. So the drought measures we put in place this year, which are actually the next thing that happened, the curtailment, have really helped us to manage our supply to avoid having to turn Loch Lomond on until yesterday. And so you can see that in this is the deficit, this is the part of the demand that we would normally say, okay, we have a short-term emergency, we need to institute curtailment. And I'm not going to go through the details of this. You have this in the packet, and we've been sort of harping on this over the last many months anyway. But the basic deal is that our curtailment plan is designed to be used to respond to short-term supply deficiencies, emergencies, those kinds of things. It obviously is focused on the more discretionary uses of the way that we use water, which in the reason that this hump exists is largely irrigation, outdoor uses, and to some degree we have, a little bit of increased population from the vacation rentals, the hospitality industry. Maybe that's offset a little bit by some of the students going away, but this is mostly driven by outdoor use, given the fact that our weather is, we have a weather pattern where we see rain that does this, basically, right? So it's the opposite of where we go here. So the focus of what we do is we focus on maintaining the health and safety water in indoor domestic use, businesses to protect jobs and the economy, and the lowest priority water, which is the focus of much of our curtailment strategy, is landscaping, irrigation, other outdoor uses. This chart is right out of our water plan. In this, In this stage 3, which is where we are now, single-family residential customers are getting 73% of what they would normally get without a drought or, you know, this kind of stage reductions in place. That 73% is actually 95% of indoor use and 33% of outdoor use. That's where that number comes from. It's just very specifically designed to target the outdoor use in the way that the measures are structured and the allocations are structured, and to maintain as much as possible the indoor use for folks who, you know, for health and safety reasons. And you can see, again, this is right out of our water shortage contingency plan. You can see the amount allocated to each one of the use areas, and I'm not going to go through that. But again, the focus of this is the discretionary use we have is really the strategy that has been developed and applied here and in lots of other places I've been, is that this is the water use that you can cut back when you have a short-term emergency, and, you know, things happen, but it's not the end of the world.
One question. We'll try to add up the numbers as we go along.
You never have any?
No, we are short of mics.
Sorry.
Trying to add up the numbers as we go along. And so we have an average of 10 million gallons used per month, roughly from 7 to 12. And here, this is 2.4 billion, is that correct? But per what period is that?
This is, I'm sorry, oh, this is this is without any restrictions in place right there.
Right, but for what period? What is that?
That's
a month or a day or a year?
That would be a year.
This is, but it says normal
Or that would,
peak.
take it back, Peter, that's peak season, that's peak season demand.
So what does that mean? How long?
It means, if you go back to this, it means that the period where water starts to move up like this because irrigation is happening to the time it moves back down. That's typically called peak season.
But is it a day or week or month?
No, it's like 6 months here.
It's 6 months.
4 to 6 months.
So it's half of, it's 6 times 10 million, right? It'd be 6 million.
I'm not sure if you're doing the math right.
Well, we have about average, at peak, we have 12 million gallons a month.
12 million gallons a day.
What's that, a month, really? Is that,
Yeah, these are average for monthly demands. So that would be, this number right here would be 12 million, oh, it does say per month, but it's actually 12 million gallons per day.
So
I
it's
apologize.
per day. Okay.
That's my error.
So we have to take these number like 10 million, or 12 million times 180 to arrive at the 2.4 billion.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay, I'll do a little calculation.
That was an excellent question.
Okay, so, okay, we're going to move on to current supply now, and again, this should be pretty familiar to pretty much everybody. So we have 4 sources of supply: the San Lorenzo River, Loch Lomond. Well, we actually have 5. The Tate Wells and San Lorenzo are kind of the same, but belts, wells, North Coast streams. That's the rough percentage of our total supplies, and you can see when the supplies were sort of brought online. The oldest one is North Coast, then came the San Lorenzo River, then came Loch Lomond, and I think Tate Wells were probably done kind of in concert with this source, and then Belts Wells. So that's the sources. These are the water rights. I'm not going to go, again, provided this information to you for background. I'm not going to go into the details of this. If you have questions, we can answer them, particularly because Chris Berry's here. He can answer questions. This is more recent information. This is gross water supply, and a little bit later in the presentation, we're going to explain the differences, why there's so many different numbers floating around out there. You can see the contributions of different sources. The sources are variable. The amount used from each source is variable based on a variety of different conditions, both kind of what else was happening. So, for example, if in this year, we were taking a lot of water out of the San Lorenzo River and way less out of Loch Lomond, whereas in this year it was a little bit switched. And, you know, each year is a little bit different. And we've got some additional graphs here that you can see. This is the average rainfall and runoff, actually
Rosemary,
runoff from the San Lorenzo River.
Rosemary, on the chart before, the gross water supply sources for the city, And
This
that's the
one?
amount of water we actually took from those sources?
Yes.
As opposed to how much we had a right to take?
No, this is how much we took.
Thank you.
And I don't think we violated our water rights in any of these situations, so, yeah. Okay, highly variable. You can see this average runoff into the system. You know, the red years are the critically dry. We're obviously having that is going on down here this year. The blue years are wet. The green years, of which there are relatively few here, are normal. And then we have this dry condition, which is kind of this yellowy color down here. So highly variable flows already in the system. And then these graphs, this series of graphs, there are 3 of these, are really intended to help you see representationally the emphasis of the different sources, how much are used out of the different sources. These first 3, which are Majors, Belts Wells, and Tate Wells, are relatively small contributors to the total supply. This sort of ugly green color right here is Lydell Springs, which is, as those of you who were on the tour, in the last month, you know, we talked a lot about the karst formation and the place where this one comes and how productive that is. And it's nice and flat even in some of the years, and I'm sorry you can't see this, but probably on the ones in your packet you can see better. There are some dry years in here that we know that, you know, you can follow along. The 87 to 92 period was dry. The early 60s had a dry period, certainly some other dry periods, 77, 76, 77. You can kind of get a sense. And you can also see, you know, the degree to which both Loch Lomond and San Lorenzo are used in our supply. And, you know, this is the workhorse of our supply, the San Lorenzo River, and then obviously Loch Lomond. And you can see that one of the things that happened somewhere right around in here was a switch in operational strategies from using a lot of Loch Lomond and less San Lorenzo to kind of more emphasis on using the San Lorenzo and a little bit less on Loch Lomond. We have 2 sort of a little bit less complicated, but by month, one for 2012 and one for 2013 here, that help you kind of see, and I'm going to explain this later on, this kind of funny bump that you saw here. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on when we get further down in the slide show. So I'm not going to go into it here, but this is kind of what we saw in 2012, and probably some of these, particularly Laguna, you would see the very low flows in this winter time frames, probably associated with fish flow releases. And then we have this one for 2013. Those of you who were on the tour last week, on Friday, heard Terry McKinney talk about an experiment that they were doing, or some testing they were doing, looking at, I think, some filtration performance, and why, when we did that, we went onto the lake because we wanted to use lake water to do that. And that is the genesis of that big bump right there. That's not usual, but it was a specific thing that was being used to support an evaluation we were doing, looking at treatment efficacy and different options for treatment. So that was last year. And we have some short-term flow agreements. They typically have a 6-month window, and we make an agreement with the fisheries agencies about what we're going to release in the next 6 months. And they're specifically agreed not to be precedent-setting for either party. We obviously have worked with them to get them to scale back the fish flow releases in these conditions and they have done that. They've worked with us on that. So this is kind of the end of the current supply section. Are there questions or comments that people want to make at this stage? Okay, moving on then. So moving into current demand, this is a chart that I mentioned that I was going to explain the difference between sort of gross production, net production, and metered water consumption. And so you can see that this is 2013 data
3.47 billion, and of that, 3.04 billion was sent through the water meters. 331 million gallons was net production, which was all the production that went through the Graham Hill Water Treatment Plant minus system uses, flushing, and losses. And then the total gross production was this 3.4 billion, which is water that's taken into the system and includes raw water sales and raw water system losses. So water taken in from the North Coast that is sold for raw water ag uses, and also for losses from the North Coast pipeline would be found in here. And it gets to the Graham Hill Water Treatment Plant, it's counted, then it's included in this amount, and we do have some system losses obviously there. So that's the difference between gross production, net production, and metered water consumption. And you'll see different aspects of those in different parts of this presentation.
Can I ask again? So
We use mic.
So we have in the 6 peak months, we have 2.4 billion billions of water, billions of gallon usage. And the total year, we have 3 billion of water usage, right?
Well, that was actually that year, I believe the numbers would be 2.4 and 3.4. So 1 billion gallons spread out over the other 6 months.
So 1 billion gallons over the other 6 months, that would mean that would mean only 5.5 million gallons a day. Is that possible in the winter? Because it's not on the chart. The chart starts at 7 and doesn't go down to 5.5. Just making sure the numbers are fit together, and that doesn't fit.
Winter consumption is obviously quite a bit less than summer consumption. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
the chart goes from winter to summer. The one you showed us, from 7 million to 12 million.
Right.
In the beginning of the year.
Right.
Right. So that never goes down to 5.5 million.
No, but so maybe that those numbers aren't quite, spread the way you're splitting them. But we can, Peter, we can get your question and sort of answer it in a little different way as we go along. Okay, this is the everything chart, and it's got a lot of data in it, and I think that I don't want to spend a ton of time on here. Maybe this is something you want to spend a little time looking at over time. So this is the rainfall, the precipitation in inches. This is the gross water, this is water production, so this is gross demand. This is accounts, the number of accounts we have that we service as water service customers. And this is the population that we're in. And you can see that they've been marked here for a number of instances where there were drought, or this was economic recession and drought combination. So I think that the takeaway message here is both numbers of accounts and population to some degree have increased, demand has decreased. And you can see, I think it was Terry Tompkins pointed out that we had roughly the same demand about here and here, and the number of accounts here was like 17,000 accounts versus 24,000 accounts. This pattern of flattening of demand, in other words, number of population served by less water, is pretty common all over the U.S. It's a factor having a lot to do with the plumbing code changes and other things that have happened. So, it's a very common trend. Okay, so this chart right here shows you there's a smooth line under this. This is 2013, 2014 data combined that shows you the actual daily demand of the system, and then it shows, this is this year, 2012 and 2013, excuse me. That's this demand, and this is 14. So you can see it's quite variable around a smoothed out curve, but the daily demand can be quite variable. In May, for example, we had some really hot weather. Even though we had restrictions in place, we saw some peaks, and we've actually had quite a warm spring. So, and we can see that as dry as it was in winter, we saw consumption quite a bit above where the normal pattern was. Another way of looking at annual metered consumption, so this is actually what goes through business or, residential, business, industry, UCSC, irrigation, municipal meters, and you can see there's been a little bit of interesting patterns. This bar right here is the industrial. So in the time frame when you had the Lipton tea and the Wrigley gum factories here, you saw a different kind of use pattern in that particular sector than you're seeing now, for example. Another way of looking at sort of more granular in some of these areas. Actually, the previous one was a little bit more granular, and this one is a little bit more combined. But another way of looking at, metered use by customer category. This is per capita consumption, and there is the system-wide per capita consumption, and then there is the single-family residential per capita consumption. And this one right here shows it's a 10-year average of per capita consumption, the system-wide number, for 349 total utilities. And when it was done, we were at 113 gallons per capita per day, which was here, and now we're at 97, which would be kind of a little bit under that line, which is 100. So this has come from the Water Conservation, Urban Water Conservation Coalition about per capita consumption, and I think this is an interesting way to look at kind of where we are relative to that particular measure. This is a lot of information I provided on customer characteristics, and Peter, some of this was designed specifically to answer the question that you asked a while ago about how many toilets, how many faucets, how many, those, kinds of things do we have in the system. You can see numbers of accounts in each one of the categories, as well as inside the city, outside the city, et cetera. And then here is the consumption information. And if you move to this one, this is the indoor-outdoor breakdown for use in each one of the categories. And if you move to this one, it's more information. This is by household, a description of the information about how household water is used, indoor and outdoor. And then some of you have heard us talk about the water conservation baseline survey that was done. The numbers surveyed in this work for each one of the categories, and I'm just going to show you the single family and the multifamily, and there's some commercial ones as well, were designed to show us data with 95% confidence that this would be representative of the full system. So that's why the numbers surveyed exist the way they do. And what you see is that this is the standard that is considered to be efficient. This is the number surveyed. The number of these things: faucets 3.5 per household, shower heads 1.8, toilets 2.1. And of those that were surveyed, and again intended to be representative of the whole, category of single family, 83% are already meeting the standard. 92% of shower heads, 90% of toilets, etc. And then the same information for multifamily residential. And there's some additional information on commercial that I didn't put in here, but we can certainly provide if you want it. This is some information about lot characteristics. Someone at the last meeting asked about the characteristics of peak use information, and so you can see for multifamily, single family, commercial, which includes schools, lot size, sites with landscaping, average lot area in landscaping, sites with turf, et cetera. Some information here about the kind of irrigation equipment that's used, and also the specifically irrigation systems in place for these categories, so in-ground irrigation systems. Anything on current demand that you want to talk about?
I actually have to go back to the previous part. You have some charts in here that show like per capita use over the last 10 years. Can those charts be expanded to be the last 50 years, or what, is there a limit on the data?
Toby, can we expand this for us? We might be able to expand this for us, but not everybody, I think. We might have the data. I'm asking Toby Goddard, who's here, to maybe speak to that.
I think the challenge with per capita, of course, is estimating population. We know what our consumption and production values were on an annual basis. That's the easy part. The difficult part is getting reliable population estimates for the service area at the time. And the reason we're giving them out now is because there's a big push statewide to better standardize and use per capita water consumption as a way to look at reducing water use. So I think we could do it at census years that would give a good period over a long time, what per capita use has been doing. In general, per capita use was going up because of household fixtures and appliances that were brought in, and then it kind of recently capped, and as Rosemary pointed out, it's been going down in the US for a number of reasons, some places slower, some places faster. So I think we could do it, but it would be more for like every 10th year when there was a census available. As you know, our system, which goes out into Live Oak and in Pastiempo, does not line up with census tracts and census boundaries. So it's a little bit of a challenge that we use GIS to try and estimate the population.
Thank you. All right. So moving on to oh, I'm going backwards. I'm sorry. What? Wait, what end is up? Moving on to future supply. So here I wanted to talk a little bit about the confluence model and to give you some information about the basic model inputs, which have to do with hydrology, stream hydrology, and the one thing that's not here has to do with the bathymetry and the characteristics of Loch Lomond, our storage. Operating rule curves for the various sources, system demand by customer class, water rights constraints. One I think that's really a thing that's important to recognize is that models aren't static. As you apply them and use them, you learn things that don't seem, they don't sort of pass the smell test. And so you start digging into them and you find that, oh yeah, that hydrology isn't really reflective of what we think is actually happening. So let's dig into that a little bit more and see where we are with that. So there's a continuous calibration process, and it's always part of developing and using models. So this chart provides some information about the changes that have been made to the confluence model since in roughly the last decade. And there is current work going on to make some additional changes that involve mostly trying to line up the hydrology from the North Coast and the San Lorenzo sources with what we are actually seeing happening in this year and some other data to sort of try to fine-tune that. So there's some work going on that we would anticipate being able to bring you back at the real deal stage to, bring you a more updated model than we've used in this particular description of the situation. So the forces affecting future, we have the same, go ahead, Mike.
I didn't understand the last chart.
This chart here?
What's it tell us?
So it says that for annual demand in the model, for the IWP, we said 4.6 to 5.3 billion. For the interim assumptions adjustment in 2010, this might have been, was this for the general plan, this piece right here? This chart?
Timing's right.
Okay, so this was obviously the demand changed. HCP work that was done, 3.5, and now the current HCP is, we're looking at 3.5 to 4. We were, peak shape, percent of annual demand in peak season, 57, 64, 64, 57. If you want to know the details of this, Heidi can answer the questions more than I can, but you can see that the calibration has been changing. This has been changed mainly associated with the fact that we have Felton diversion, and the water right doesn't, that we can pump up from, the water we can pump up from Felton diversion doesn't affect the withdrawal right from Loch Lomond itself, so that's a little bit of that's a change. Some different things associated with each one of these parameters as well. So that's what it's about. So there are two basic forces that we see as affecting future demand, and one of them we have some sense of what it might mean. We're going to talk a little bit about that. The other one is a little bit substantially vaguer, let's put it that way. So we have chosen to provide for the recon stage fish flow release flow sets that were in the DEIR, and we've done that specifically because we know what the model says about them, we can describe them, we can, use them in helping us to sort of decide or understand what the low-end possibility and the high-end possibility of the impacts of fish flows might be on our supply. We know that there's more work to be done, and again, from a modeling perspective, these numbers might fine-tune themselves a little bit, but the set of flow issues for fish flow is not going to be resolved before we finish this process. They're not. So what we've done is we said we think we have a boundary condition with a low end and a high end, and that's what we know. Those of you who have been following this topic know about Tier 1, 2, and 3, know about a proposal for sort of a hybrid of a Tier 3, 2 that was a proposal. This describes what those in terms of what the flows are, the releases, and what the objectives are for Tier 2, 3. And what we're going to do now is kind of show you an example of what happens with current demand, again, not managed relative to any kind of curtailment, current demand, and 1977 hydrology, worst year hydrology. And we understand that, it's a low probability that this year happens, but it's the descriptive part of this that we want to be able to show you. We have opportunity as we go forward to do more manipulation of, what different flow years, a hydrology to put into the situation. What this shows is that you would deploy your sources, and they're in a little bit different order than we had them in those other graphs. Belts, North Coast sources, San Lorenzo, this whole area here, and then this is the Loch Lomond source. And you are short 297 million gallons of meeting system demand in the worst case year with current demands, without the demand being curtailed or managed through curtailment. If you use the Tier 3-2 flow set, which we believe is the low end of what is a feasible agreed amount, that shortage goes to 650 million gallons. And if you use the...
This is a monthly shortage?
No, total seasonal. Seasonal. If you use the Tier 3 flows, then the shortage goes to 1.5, almost 1.6 billion gallons. So you can see that basically the water would be being used for the fish is relatively little in the system the way this is modeled anyway, again, for illustrative purposes of trying to define what the shortage is. This is using up Loch Lomond, and it's pretty much, used up by the... obviously you never operate like this, but it helps you to understand what the nature of the problem is and the potential impacts. Again, those of you who are following this know that DFG 5 is a flow set that was a counterproposal. It was actually a higher impact counterproposal than even the tier, that's right, tier 3 flows, or it's not as high as tier 3 flows? Tier 3 flows is a worser case, more difficult case than the other one. And this is information that I'm not going to go through, but it sort of describes a little bit more detail some of the back history about these flow sets. So before I move on, do anyone want to ask questions about these flow sets?
Well, I guess my question would be, you know, maybe, I guess the question would be, when would we be able to get some of the details about the assumptions that go into these estimates? You know, is that something we can ask our consultant to do?
So the details about, so explain to me what you want details about, the flow assumptions or the, tell me more about.
Well, let's just take the chart that's shown right here. It should,
I'm sorry.
50, slide 56, the next one, yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so this is tier 3 flows. Okay, so we just heard that this is more extreme even than what the fisheries agencies want, right?
Yes, and we did this because it was displayed in the DEIR. We're not saying
Right.
this is, we're
Okay.
trying to bound
But just to give you an idea of what my question is, so it looks like in April, we basically stopped using the lake, or drop it way down to almost, nothing. By July, there's nothing of lake water used. So what that tells me is that, the lake has been used previously to a high extent, maybe in the previous year. If there's nothing left in the lake to use in the middle of summer of a 1977 hydrological conditions, that's bad news, right? So
Yeah.
the assumption that would go into that is what I'm looking for. How much of the lake did we use in the previous year? How much
Right.
do we use in a normal year, and so on?
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely, we can provide that.
His question actually was, could he ask the consultant to provide that? But you're saying that he can.
Well, I'm saying that we can explain the condition, the modeling conditions that started on November 1st. Where were we at October 31st that fed into this? Which is what I think you're asking. Is this in fact, the model says now where we were starting this is October 31st of 1976, where we know that the lake was like at a third of full. If that's the case, then that might affect why you're seeing what you're seeing here.
Yeah, just all the assumptions that go into you told us that this chart is based on, for example, the demand that you project, and that was a range you gave us, 3,500 million gallons to 4 billion. So that which of the range are we looking at here?
So this is current demand, so this would be basically 3.5 billion.
So the lower number, okay.
Yeah, it's not with growth. This is current demand, 1977 hydrology, and then tier 3 fish flows is what this creates that scenario.
Okay. So, just for the sake of people who haven't been in on the phone conference that we had, so in the phone conference we had, I pointed out that in the integrated water plan of 2003, there was an assumption made that Loch Lomond would be used to the maximum extent possible under the water rights of just over 1 billion gallons a year in normal years. So if you use the lake at that level in a normal year, obviously you're not going to have as much water left in a second dry year. In fact, in a chart that was produced not in the integrated water plan but in the urban water management plan in 2005, it said we only had 200 million gallons of Loch Lomond water to use in that second dry year. So that's a big assumption, and one that, you know, if we really wanted to tweak, you know, how we use the lake, it could make a huge difference in terms of how much water is available in a second dry year.
So I get the point you're making, and we undoubtedly will be exploring that and similar kinds of points about operational changes that could or possibly would affect what this looks like. But at the bottom, I think that the takeaway message from this is the hydrology in 77 is pretty dire. The demand in the system without fish flows is, you know, creates we have almost a 300 million gallon shortage without fish flows. And if you add this kind of fish flow strategy to this, or, you know, then it really creates a pretty dire situation. Now maybe, clearly 1977 doesn't happen every year, and that's obviously, you know, good. But the question is, to what degree do you need to plan for some kind of increased reliability to help you deal with the situation when you have this kind of thing, which you ultimately will have a version of that again. We're almost having that this year.
I guess, just in follow-up, I mean, at some point, I don't know how soon we can get it, but if the consultant could model the actual parameters that we're looking at for you know, the fisheries agencies have asked for, they've given us their best case for the fish request, which is the DFG number 5, right? So let's see that one modeled, because it's not as severe as this one. And then let's see what the city is proposing as a negotiating counterpoint to that. That would be good.
Well, again, what we proposed was this, and what they came back at, and that's what this sort of describes the situation here. We can certainly get a DFG5 model so you can have a version of this with the DFG5. I mean, that's something we can do. Okay. So the other sort of issue that's out there, the one that was described, I think, in the outline, along with some other things as irreducible uncertainty, and the other things on that list of irreducible uncertainty aren't exactly irreducible, but this one is, and that's climate change. And I apologize that this is very hard to see. If you look at page, sorry, I don't know where we are. It's page 60 of your, you will see that this is a table that came out of this document, which is the Santa Cruz Integrated Regional Water Management Plan Conceptual Framework Update. It was published about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago. And it uses some information from various sources to talk about, this is air temperature, this is temperature variability, this is sea level rise, this is annual precipitation, and then this is variability of precipitation. And you can see that there are some characteristics that are described here. Obviously, hotter weather in general creates more water demand, at least if you're going to maintain the kind of irrigation plan that we currently have of some sort. I mean the community. And precipitation patterns, if those change, so increased variability overall, I think, are the takeaways. Increased frequency of drought, probable increased frequency of drought. If you take that chart from earlier, the one with the precip, let's find it for you. No, not that one. Too many charts in here. This one, page, 24. If you look at this one, it's already quite variable. And if we get increased variability, I think that the likelihood of having droughts, they may not be all severe droughts, but I think the likelihood of having more droughts is increased. And then changes in precipitation patterns, I think, are one of the things that was sort of described in the little box